Blessed or cursed, which would you prefer? To have a life full of woe or a life filled with blessings? Which do you want for yourself? Obviously, I think everyone would want to say a life of blessings, unless there's something seriously wrong with you. Yes, we all want to have an abundance of blessings and the least amount of woes and misfortunes. It is probably why you're here at Mass, asking for God's help in your life, at least one of the reasons. It is why you work hard or study hard to get ahead in life so that you can have good opportunities now and in the future. It's in fact why you seek relationship with others so as to avoid loneliness or isolation. All that being said, you would think that anyone who is rich or well-fed or laughing or well-respected would be certainly indications of someone who is blessed. Well, someone who is poor or hungry or weeping or hated would be characteristics of someone consigned to a life of want and woe. One would think that, yes, but not for Jesus. Jesus flips the script, if you will, and says, it is woe to be rich or well-fed or laughing or well-respected, and yet it is blessed to be poor or hungry or weeping or even hated. Think about this for a moment. If Jesus is trying to gain followers, this is like the worst campaign strategy ever. I mean, we just had a presidential election. Imagine if one of the candidates said, if you vote for me, your life is going to get worse. The country is going to go downhill. It's going to be a terrible situation for you over the next 4 years and so forth. Who would vote for that person? So we might ask ourselves, who would want what Jesus is calling blessings? Of course, there's more to the story than just the amount of economic success that one has, or one's emotional state in life, or even the esteem we are held in by others. Jesus is focusing on not just what one has at the moment, but what the ultimate goal and end will be. Last Sunday, of course, was Super Bowl Sunday. Think for a moment of what it must take to win a Super Bowl. One doesn't just throw the ball around a Saturday or two to be able to compete and win on that level. In order to become an elite athlete, one must be willing to sacrifice a great deal in order to compete like that. This includes many things, such as not just being able to eat what you want, whatever you want, or not being able to sleep in most days, and not being liked by everyone, such as the opposing team or the opposing team's fans, and not having the time to do certain things that others have the time to do. But that elite athlete makes those sacrifices willingly for some greater good that he or she desires. In this case, a sports championship. So what does God want for you? God wants something far more important for you than just a trophy, a medal, or a championship ring. What is it that God desires for you? What is it that God has in mind for you? What is it that God wants for you? It's eternity, eternal happiness with Him. And nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to that. So when Jesus lists these blessings and woes that seem to be mixed up, at least from the point of view of the world, what the Lord is really saying to us is, what He's saying to you is, don't be short-sighted. Don't just chase after the things of this life. and thereby run the real risk of losing everything in the next. I've had 2 weddings this weekend alone and a slew in the weeks to come. So maybe because of that, marriage is on my mind a lot. Not for me, obviously, okay? But think for a moment what the bride and the groom promise to each other. They don't just promise to be there for each other in good times, as long as the other remains healthy. They don't just say to be there for the other in those days that are better or richer. No, they make the commitment to each other even when things are bad, or when there is sickness, or when things seem worse, or even if they are poor. The values of the world tell us that we should only seek to be rich and well-fed and happy and healthy. But those are not the highest values for Christ. Now, this does not mean that we should seek misery or poverty or persecution. Doesn't mean that you should try to be an irritating person so people will dislike you. But if we only embrace the values of this world and orient our lives around just getting and maintaining those things, then our priorities are mixed up indeed. Yes, we all live in this world, but there is a big difference, a huge difference between being in the world versus being of the world. If your top priorities in life are simply to get lots of money, to have a big house, to drive a nice car, to go on great vacations, and to eat at nice restaurants, then woe is you, then woe are you indeed. In fact, that's what the Lord is saying to you, woe. But not woe, W-O-E, but W-H-O-A. Woe. Stop. For such an approach to life means that you are not on the path to heaven, but sadly on the highway to hell. No one wants to go to hell, just as no one wants to have a heart attack. But what are the choices you're making right now? And what direction are those things leading you? This is a question that we should ask of ourselves often and honestly of ourselves. For in the end, Jesus Christ challenges us to be selfless, not selfish. He calls you to be a person with a generous heart and not a person with a self-centered spirit. And it is through that prism of Christ's love that we must honestly look at our lives. The view of the world tells us that we should do everything just for ourselves. But the perspective of God is that we should do it for others. This sounds familiar, huh? Well, it should, because it's the reality of the cross. Yes, we should call to mind the cross every day. The cross should not just be an ornamentation for a religious building or a wall decoration in our homes, or even just a nice piece of jewelry. No, we should look on the cross and recognize in that God's total selfless love for us. Indeed, God's sacrificial love for us. Christ puts others first. He asks that we do the same. And it is through the cross, after all, that we are saved. The cross is not just the model for Christians, but in fact, the only hope for salvation. And the cross, despite what the world tells you, or more accurately, lies to you, the cross is the only road to true happiness. Now, we can be, sometimes we think about that, we can be overwhelmed by our own unworthiness and feel like we will never measure up. You know, it's very common if you go into an Eastern church, whether it's an Eastern Orthodox church or Eastern Catholic church. We brought our 8th graders here at Christ the King School to a Ukrainian Catholic church this week for the Divine Liturgy. And there's a scene that you see in virtually every Eastern church, and it shows this old man and woman, and they are standing in these caskets, the coffins. And they are reaching up with one arm, and standing before them is Christ. And he has a hold of them. That old couple is Adam and Eve. And it is Jesus going down to the boat of the dead to lift them up. But what is striking about this icon is how Christ holds them. They lift up, and Christ is holding them by the wrist. They're not hanging on. They're just reaching to Christ, and it's Christ who reaches down and does all the work. He pulls us out of that. So it's a beautiful paradigm for our lives. So lift your hand to Christ. Reach out to him and let him lift you out of sin, selfishness, and death. And receive that for which you truly long and desire. Eternal bliss, eternal happiness with God forever.